Goaltending. You know, it's funny. We have debates on everything hockey related on this channel, and I enjoy the debates, even the uncomfortable ones, because there's things that need to be talked about. And sometimes there's stuff that I think needs to get talked about that maybe some in the media go, I don't think we should touch that. Well, goaltenders, that's not one of those things. So, what's interesting for me with goaltenders is if I ask you who the greatest is, the answer is, right? Right? And I say that about Patrick Roy, even though as a Bruins fan, this jersey kind of burns a little bit, and it reminds me of so many awful playoffs where Roy just beat Boston. Patrick Roy versus Boston was a bad matchup for Boston. Forget the whole Montreal thing during that era. It was Raw. And it was frustrating to me. But the thing is, when we discuss who the best goalie of all time is, there are a lot of conversations that take place and have since this channel started out. So how do you measure it? That's where the problem is. This past week on TSN, Dave Poulin was talking about how wins are overrated. And I don't disagree with him. Not even a little bit. Wins are overrated. Usually in a win, a goaltender will look pretty good, but it doesn't mean that in a loss, the goaltender didn't look good on the other side either. And there are plenty of great goaltenders who played on some really bad teams. It's affected their wins totals, probably affected their save percentage because the defense in front of them wasn't very good. And it's affected their overall standing, so their ability to get into all-star games, to get awards, and then, of course, Hall of Fame induction or even consideration, not a thing. And so one thing that comes into this is, okay, so how do we measure it? Good luck. If you go by career save percentage, Hassek's the best of all time. And Buffalo fans just went, yeah. Red Wing fans went, yeah. 922.3 save percentage, career. Johnny Bower, 921.9. Ken Dryden, 921.5. Dryden gets forgotten. We have the argument over Waugh, we have the argument over Brodeur and Hasek, and we forget all about the guys who came before because most of us are too young to remember them. And that's what it is. It's not that they weren't good goaltenders. It's that we're too young to remember them. I didn't watch Ken Dryden. But Dryden's numbers were fantastic. And for people who go, well, yeah, it was that Montreal team. Yeah, he stepped away for a year. And that year that he stepped away, Montreal, nowhere near champions. Begged him to come back the next year. He comes back, and ta-da, they're relevant again. Rask, 921.2. Ben Bishop, 920.6. So whenever I see somebody saying, well, yeah, Bishop had a good year for Dallas, but can he really follow it up? I hear that, and I think, so you haven't followed Bishop's career. Cool. Thomas, the one question with Bishop is health. That's really it. It's not whether or not he can do it. Thomas, 919.9. Tim Thomas, of course, what held him back was that nobody had any faith in him until he was in his 30s. So his overall numbers, low. Jacques Plante, 919.6. Bobrovsky, 919 even. That's right. Florida's Bobrovsky is top 10 all-time in save percentage. Corey Schneider, 918.9. Despite having 3 down years, Schneider's still in that list. Schneider at one point was over 920 in his career. And he looked like he was going to be one of the best career save percentage goalies ever. Still top 10. And Luongo's right there at 918.7. Below the line, you've got Glenn Hall with 917.6, Bernie Perron at 915, Gump Worsley 913.9, and there's Marty Brodeur at 912.3. And this is where that conversation comes up, right? Like, well, wait now. You can't look at just how many he saved or how many he faced. It's what were the quality of the shots he faced and when did he save them. And this is when that comes in, right? Because the person who looks up here and goes, well, Hasek has to be the best, will make an argument that sounds coherent and makes sense. And then a person who has Brodeur down here at 912.3 will make a coherent argument that makes sense. Patrick Roy, 910.2. I can make a coherent argument for Patrick Roy as well. Much like anybody of almost any goaltender in between. But if you're going to argue Corey Schneider's the best goaltender of all time, you're going to get tested. Sawchuk, and I'll leave it to you guys to decide what kind of a test that is, whether it's a math test or an English test. Sawchuk, 906.6, and yet you will find people who argue Terry Sawchuk was the greatest goaltender of all time. Eddie the Eagle Belfour, 906.4, and Grant Fuhr, 887 even. Oh, I never understood, and I know for Oiler fans they loved Fuhr, and there were a lot of fans who thought Grant Fuhr was great. I never saw the hype. I never bought it. I thought he was better later in his career than he was when he was the Oilers goaltender. But I understand the point that people make. People say, yep, he would allow those 4 goals, but the 5th wouldn't go in. And you had a team of Oilers that didn't play defense. They had no clue about the defensive end of things and didn't even know who their goaltender was because they weren't back there. So I understand the argument. But again, just looking at sheer numbers to make the argument that Fear is one of the greatest of all time, you can't use save percentage to make that argument. So where do you look to make that argument? You can look at wins. Marty Brodeur, 691. And there's the hat. There's the rack you lay your hat on if you're a New Jersey fan. You go 691 games played, or 691 wins. He played more games than everybody else. That's when people put their hand up and go, but didn't he lose almost more games than almost anybody else? Yeah, smack him right down. Patrick Waugh, 551 wins. Luongo, 489. The argument against Luongo being a Hall of Famer, it just got worse and worse every year. There were people who still wanted to argue he wasn't a Hall of Famer. That number seems to have dropped substantially. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it dropped when he went back to Florida. I think there were some that felt that because Canuck fans were making the argument Luongo should be a Hall of Famer, it was, well, you guys are biased because he's your goaltender. But 489 wins speaks for itself. Or does it? Are wins really overrated? The problem is this. Brodeur, Hall of Fame, obviously. Roy, Hall of Fame. Belfour, 484, in the Hall of Fame. Curtis Joseph, why isn't Cujo in the Hall of Fame? 454, and if you look at, I looked at shots faced in their career, and Curtis Joseph's top 5 all-time in shots faced by goaltenders. Henrik Lundqvist, 449, I can't see how he doesn't end up in the Hall. He'll pass Cujo this year. Terry Sawchuk, 445. Marc-Andre Fleury, 439. He'll pass Sawchuk this year, and Joseph as well. Jacques Plante, 437. And Tony Esposito, 423. Now, if you're getting into the all-time stuff, people are going to look at all these lists and go, you know what? George Hainsworth, 94 shutouts. Played a lot of that before forward passing, but hey, different league, right? Different time. So Esposito rounds out the top 10 with 423, and looking below that line, you'll find Glenn Hall with 407, and there's Grant Fuhr with 403. So again, if you want to make an argument, Grant Fuhr is one of the greatest of all time, you can look at wins. Hasek, 389. Ken Dryden, 258. So if you want to make an argument against Ken Dryden, you say he didn't play long enough. He didn't play a long enough career to be one of the greatest, which is weird, but fine. You can make that argument. Johnny Bower, 250. Bower, pretty good numbers throughout his career. I don't have him listed in the save percentage, but I think he was around the 9. No, he's up at the top. He says right too. He's 921.9. I was quite stunned to see that, but you could look and say, well, Bower, 250. He wasn't high enough in the wins. The thing with Johnny Bower, very similar to Tim Thomas, when he broke through into the NHL, he was older, to the point where he wouldn't tell people how old he actually was. And there was a lot of rumors at the time that he lied and said he was younger than he actually was to make sure that he had a job in the National Hockey League. Goals saved above average. So this is basically an idea of, okay, if we look at the average across the league, how many goals did a goaltender prevent over the entirety of their career, above and beyond what could have been expected? And this is highly subjective. This is just looking at just pure numbers. And there are people who will look at this number and say, hey, that doesn't take into account goaltenders that play behind bad defense, and maybe their numbers were poor because of that. Right, my point. And every time I talk about that, the name that comes to mind is Ron Tugnutt. It's just, that's the guy who comes to mind is Ron Tugnutt. Very long career. His overall numbers, but you know what? He was really solid. He was a really good goaltender, and it's one of those things where if you didn't see him play, you'd look at his page on HockeyDB and you'd go, well, I guess Shannon could be right. He played for a lot of teams, so he had to be okay, but got traded a lot, so but he didn't play for good teams. And then you can make the argument of, but does a good goaltender make a bad team look better? And there are some goalies who've been able to do that and some who haven't. So, goals saved above average over their career. Tony Esposito leads by a mile with 498. We don't talk about Tony Esposito, do we? When we get into conversations about who the greatest goaltenders of all time, Tony Esposito really doesn't come up. And yet, here he is at the top of a chart for his entire career as number 1 with goals saved above average. Patrick Waugh is number 2 at 460, so that makes this jersey look a little better. Problem being, of course, when you get into save percentage, he's down here at 910.2. So you can make an argument against it. Hasek, 413. Bernie Parent, 321. Parent doesn't get talked about very much either. Not when you get into the conversation about the greatest of all time. Ken Dryden, right there at 317. This is where you can use Ken Dryden's career being shorter and say, well, if he'd played a 15, 16-year-long career, odds are he's number one on this list. Then you're getting into conjecture and you're getting into the whole speculative side of things. Jacques Plante, 295. Luongo, 270. Hall, 240. Billy Smith, 231. Marty Brodeur, 207, so he cracks the top 10. Belfour's here at 173. And just out of curiosity, if you're wondering, Henrik Lundqvist currently has 187. And he is the leader among current goaltenders. Still active anyways, because Luongo having retired means he's no longer on the active list. But he's on all three top 10s. So he will be in the Hall of Fame. And I know there's people who would rather not see that. But I think that number dropped a lot when he went back to Florida. Trying to find a stat that measures goaltending. Now, I agree with, and again, I'm going back to what they said on TSN. I kind of agree with Gord Miller on this, that I defer to save percentage. But again, there are people who can say, well, yeah, but if a guy saves 26 out of 30 shots, but all 4 goals were right in front of the net, and it wasn't his fault, are you really going to look at that save percentage and say he wasn't good that night? And it's a fair argument. And there are goaltenders who play behind bad defense. There are goaltenders who were nowhere near this board who had very, very good careers. I'm thinking of Joel Meloche right now. Pretty darn good goaltenders. And just their career numbers won't tell you just how good they were. I'm not sure that we'll ever find a stat that measures it. And this is why anytime you want to start an argument, you can do this at work, you can do this at school, you can do this at a family table, at any holiday and go, I think the greatest goaltender of all time was, and you can say any name you want, and you are very, very unlikely to find consensus. Because again, while I can say, and this is why I always sort of do the disclaimer of, in the time I've watched hockey, I put Brodeur, Hasek, Roy as the top 3. Patrick Roy number 1, Hasek number 2, Brodeur number 3. But I don't try to say the greatest goaltender of all time. I just stop with while I've been watching hockey. Because when we get into, I think Brodeur's greatest goalie of all time because he had 691 wins. Somebody who watched hockey back in, say, the 60s and 70s could say, yeah, but he has an 82-game schedule. He had shootout wins. He had overtime wins that a lot of these guys didn't have. And he had some benefits that these other guys didn't have. And people could point out, if Ken Dryden played now, who knows how long his career might have been. He would have made a heck of a lot more money. Might have been far more motivated to stay in the NHL. It's a tough it's a tough debate to have because, again, we won't agree on which number to use. You may look at wins and go, that's fantastic. I look at wins and go, that's nice if you're in a fantasy pool. You can look and go, yeah, Vasilevsky should be your first pick if you're in a fantasy pool for this year. But is he the overall best goalie in the league? I picked him as first, but in all honesty, the numbers I'm using, whether it's save percentage, whether it is wins, whether it's goals against, shutouts, whatever it is, a lot of what I'm going to be using may very well be determined by the team playing in front of them. There's an eyeball test, and what we look for in a goaltender might be completely different. I've seen where a goaltender puts up great numbers, and a fan will argue, I don't trust him. I don't trust him. He flops around on the ice. I don't like the way he plays goal. I don't think he's very good. I know all the numbers say he's good, but the way he plays net makes me nervous every night. I don't think he's the best in the league. I think that guy is. I like the way he plays, whether it's stand-up or butterfly. I like the way he plays the game. I think he's a good goaltender, and I know the numbers don't bear it out, but I think he's better. And in all honesty, it is the one position that is the hardest to call. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below regarding greatest goaltenders of all time kind of thing. And which one in the game right now do you think years down the road we'll see? Like, for instance, right now I would say Braden Holtby has an excellent chance of cracking the top 10 in wins. He is putting up wins at an incredible rate in Washington. So as long as he stays in Washington and keeps getting all those starts, there's no reason to think he won't end up top 10 on the wins list. And goals saved above average, who knows where we'll see that number go. Because, like I said, Lundqvist is the closest among active goalies with 187. It's going to be ages before anybody even thinks about getting near Tony Esposito. So, is Tony Esposito actually the greatest goalie of all time? Because at the time I started watching hockey, it was towards the end of his career. I didn't see him at his best. And Chicago fans who watched him put up, 15 shutouts in a year and that kind of thing, and he was still putting up shutouts in the 70s when they were hard to come by, they'll tell you, Espo was the greatest. But let me know your thoughts, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And yeah, I could have filled this board with all kinds of different stats, but I wanted to go with these three because, again, these are the three that I think people would be most likely to use. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.